This video will look at the work of plant breeders over recent decades to provide a wide diversity and choice of tomato varieties as a response to some concerns that varieties were becoming less diverse.
We choose tomato because we have a long history in tomato research, and moreover, there were concerns about the genetic diversity, especially regarding tomato. So we measured the diversity of the tomato cultivars at the DNA level by first collecting plant varieties, tomato varieties, from the different decades, the 50s, 60s, 70s, etc. until now. And then we isolated DNA and looked at the DNA, how much diversity there was between varieties within a decade. That was the first thing. The second thing is that we also looked at the fruit quality traits. So we looked at sweetness, acidity, texture, juiciness, aromatic compounds, so how does it smell? And we evaluated that for each decade.
The result was clear.
Nowadays we have an 8-fold increase compared to the 1960s, looking at the DNA level.
To understand what led to that increase in diversity in recent decades, we need to take a step back to the past, starting with the origin of the domesticated tomato.
Centuries ago in South America, the Incas were collecting from the wild tomatoes in nature, their own tomatoes, just for eating. After that, tomatoes were also transported to Central America. That was many centuries ago, leading to a decrease compared to the wild tomatoes. Then Columbus also imported these tomatoes into northwestern Europe, leading to a further reduction in diversity. These tomatoes were further propagated. They were by collecting seeds from these plants, leading to selection and a further decrease in genetic diversity. That diversity went down and down, especially in the previous century. So actually in the 1960s, all tomatoes were very similar. They had this size, were red, round, and were all very similar. The growers were interested in yield, and therefore the breeders were very much focused on yield and also on reduction of pesticides, because it's also important for the growers. In the 1970s, breeders started to introduce resistances to diseases and pests in the varieties by making crosses between the normal tomatoes, the commercial tomatoes, and wild tomatoes. And these wild tomatoes had resistances. They were introduced, leading to an increase in genetic diversity in the 1970s, in the 1980s, and still it's increasing because of adding new resistances from wild tomatoes, making these tomatoes more resistant, stronger, less dependent on pesticides, so they can be grown in a good way, healthy and strong.
In the 1970s, the focus was on breeding for the needs of growers, but maybe less on providing choices for consumers.
20, 30 years ago, there was 1 or 2 tomato types in a grocery shop in a supermarket. It was a big red tomato. I think that the change in the 80s has been mainly driven by the consumers. They simply were complaining, hey, these tomatoes, they are not tasty. And they were right. The focus had been too much on just making more tomatoes and, in this case, going at the cost of flavor. It was an eye-opener for industry. And not only breeding companies, but also retail. We all put in our efforts in order to change that step. Nowadays, there are maybe 10 different products in the supermarkets. Cherry tomatoes, the so-called snacks, they are in plastic boxes. You can get them on the vine. You have different colors. There are differences in flavor. You don't see it, but you know them when you buy them. So there is an enormous variation in choices which have become available for consumers, as well as you can think about the industry. So for the ketchup and for the produce chain making for sandwiches, for example, they also require a specific type of tomato. So in that way, breeding has facilitated in making applicable products, hybrids, which are suited for the needs of a produce chain partner or a consumer.
It's important to have sufficient diversity among varieties to prevent the situation that serious epidemics arise. As we've seen last century, for instance in bananas, where there was a serious epidemics from banana because of Panama disease, because all bananas were the same. So when one banana became susceptible, whole fields were destroyed by the Panama disease.
Without genetic diversity, we cannot do plant breeding, and we cannot anticipate on making new products for the future. And this varies from finding disease resistances for growers, as well as identifying and making available new interesting traits for consumers. Better flavor, still different colors, everything what is appealing for consumers. Without genetic variation, this would not be possible. The genetic diversity is, of course, the basis to do plant breeding. And we have several sources of genetic variation. It starts with available commercial varieties from ourselves as well as from competitors, which through plant breeding exemption we can utilize to keep or even increase the genetic diversity. Then we have also heirloom varieties and also wild species. These are maintained through gene banks, which are doing a very important job in maintaining the genetic diversity which exists in nature.
We support safeguarding genetic diversity by supporting gene banks all over the world. We cooperate with them for the storing of their seeds, for the multiplication of the seeds from the gene bank. We support the gathering missions that they do. With this, we ensure a worldwide supply of genetic variation available to the global society.
We basically fund our R&D work, so our research and breeding, through seed sales. As it takes between 5 to 10 years to make varieties, this is a long-term investment. Plant breeders' rights are very important to us because it is important to have this return on investment.
Plant breeders' protections plays a very important role as it enables us to protect the varieties and all the research and effort that has gone into these varieties, makes us able to gain an income on these varieties. Development of tomato varieties, without this return on investment, it would be impossible to continue the breeding of new varieties, and therefore we cannot contribute to the society.
One of the features of the UPOV system of plant variety protection is the breeder's exemption. Under the breeder's exemption in the UPOV Convention, the authorization of the breeder is not required for the use of protected varieties for breeding new varieties. Is that important for breeders?
The breeding exemption allows the use of genetic variation which is available at commercial level, thereby not hindering doing plant breeding. But at the same time, it's an exemption. So it is giving, let's say, for the breeding companies a time advantage if you have developed a new variety. And the breeding exemption makes it that it doesn't become a monopoly of one or two breeding companies.
The membership of UPOV gives great benefits to both growers and consumers, as it encourages us to keep developing new varieties, which in turn help the grower and also give a stable supply of healthy tomatoes for the consumers.
It's important that countries have a membership for the UPOV and thereby supporting the guidance and rules which are set and standardized by UPOV. Some countries are not part of UPOV, and simply making it that companies are not investing for these countries in making suited varieties. So that's a pity for them, because it is not in their benefit if they are not member of UPOV.
Through climate change, the conditions of growing tomatoes will change. This will also bring new diseases and pests with them. At the same time, consumers change their needs for tomatoes or how they use tomatoes. As breeding companies, we need to tick all these boxes.
We don't know what consumer needs will be in the future, but I think they will continue to choose for diversity. Some like more sweet, some like more acid tomatoes. I believe that there is also a trend for higher social awareness. So better for climate, lower carbon footprints, and if we can reach that through different ways of growing, using different varieties, I think that will also be something to anticipate on for the future.